Welcome to our presentation. My name is Lori Ransom, and I will be presenting along with Julie Johnson and Emily Eshman about the basics of results-based accountability. The objective of this presentation is for you to gain an understanding of turn the curve thinking, the concept of accountability of the whole versus accountability for a part. We will be talking about population accountability versus performance accountability. The most important application of this concept is the distinction between the two. And finally, how to select results, indicators, and performance measures. Results-based accountability, often abbreviated as RBA, is based on two books by Mark Friedman, Trying Hard is Not Good Enough and Turning the Curves. We'll be looking at some key principles. Start with ends and work backwards to means. You will want to use data-driven, transparent decision-making. Make sure that the accountability framework is useful to managers and not just a compliance exercise. And finally, keep it simple, which is one of the most important virtues of results-based accountability. It is a simple framework to use. Turn the curve thinking. We are going to use an analogy of a leaky roof to illustrate turn the curve thinking and to make the point that it is really common sense. It's what we do every day, and we should use as we apply common sense thinking in a public nonprofit sector. Where would we begin? We would begin with the ends in mind. We'd want to use data-driven information, and we would access the condition of the roof. Then we would be measuring the amount of rain that is leaking into the home. We'd want to compare that against our ideal outcome of the condition of a dry roof where there is zero water leaking into the bucket. Historically, over the last few rainstorms, the inches of water has increased. And if we do nothing different, it's only going to get worse. What to do next? We have to ask ourselves, what is going on here? What is causing the roof to leak? We need to come up with a strategy or an action plan in stopping the leak. What's the story behind the leaky roof? The roof is about 20 years old. There's been a few severe windstorms. We may have missing tiles. The flashing is cracked. We may have cracks in a few tiles. Also, we have had an unusually high amount of rainstorms. Now we need to brainstorm possibilities of what to do. Who can help us and what would work to fix the roof? Who would we need to involve? We would need to have someone look at the roof and find the leak. Once we know what is wrong with the roof, we would need to find someone to fix the roof. Are we going to do it ourselves? We could have a family member or a friend that would help us save on labor costs. We need supplies. Where are we going to go to buy those supplies? We would need a way to pay for those supplies. We could use a credit union or we could use a bank. What would make the most difference and is feasible? We decided that we will take out a small loan with our credit union and hire a professional roofing contractor to fix the roof who can guarantee their work. This is ends to means decision making, but we need to come back and track how we are doing over time. Did the action we took turn the curve in the amount of water leaking from the roof? Over time, we will be able to track this. We need to watch the next time there is a rainstorm to see if the action we took helped us reach our objectives of not having a leaky roof. Over the last 6 months, there has been 8 rainstorms, and there was no sign of moisture in the home. But we will keep revisiting using the same process to make sure we are on track. We will have to make sure that after a big windstorm, there is no damage done to the roof. We'll need to revisit the data and watch the historic forecasts as well as we will need to watch the historic and the forecast trend lines. We'll also need to do regular maintenance in looking for missing tiles or damaged tiles that would let the water in. We want to keep the ideal condition of maintaining a dry home. So we will keep revisiting and doing this ongoing process. This is the process of applying turn the curve thinking in an analogy. Let's look at turn the curve thinking in its formal process. In the book that Mark Friedman wrote, Trying Hard is Not Good Enough, he lists 7 questions. We will be using 5 core questions, which is just a distillation of those questions that make it a little simpler and easier to remember. Let's run through these 5 core questions. The first one to think about is, how are we doing? That is the ends. We are also talking about data-driven. We are talking about data on how we are doing. We are using the amount of inches of rain from the leaky roof. What is the story behind the curve? Who are our partners who have a role to play in turning the curve? What works in turning the curve? And what is our action plan to turn the curve? We have our ends to means, and we want to be transparent. Let's start with the first step in how we are doing. We need to put the data that we have on the trend line over time. The historic is usually empirical, whereas the forecast is where you are headed if you do nothing different. A very important concept that if we do not apply any of the strategies and do nothing different, this is the direction we will go. So the question to be asked, is the direction of the forecast okay if we do nothing different? Do we want to do better than that with turn the curve thinking? The difference between turn the curve thinking and the forecast will be our return on investment in regards to resources, time, political will, etc. on the used strategy. The second of the 5 core questions would be the story behind the curve. You actually have to do this step before you can even do the forecast. This is a matter of restricting and contributing factors. What has influenced the trend line or slope of that curve? Some people think of this as a force-field analysis. We want to get to the root causes, and you'll be able to do that by asking the question why over and over again and drilling down. You want to include positive as well as negative factors about what is helping. You want to look at the current and anticipated factors by looking ahead at things that may come down the road, like changes in policies, budgets, demographics, economy, etc. Then you want to look at the internal as well as the external, not just focusing on what is in your immediate control, but understand that external factors also. Sometimes you may have more influence than you previously thought that were beyond your control. You want to prioritize the root causes because that will influence what you use as strategies. You want to address those that are most important because that is where you can make the greatest difference. Ask yourselves, do we need to do more to understand better with additional research? We want to have confidence in our strategies and where they're going to make the greatest difference. There are 2 tips. 1, focus on the story. Do not jump to solution. Make sure you're addressing the root causes using the right strategies to turn the curve. 2, don't define the root causes in terms of solutions. You need to better understand behavior before you can talk about what the solution is. Number 3 in our 5 core questions is, who are our partners who have a role to play in turning the curve? You may want to leverage a partnership and a collaborations by looking at non-traditional partnership as well as traditional partnership. By understanding the story behind the curve can often lead us to the right partners that need to be involved. With partners also comes diverse perspective. By having diverse perspective at the table will give you a full understanding of the dynamics of what is driving that trend line. What works to turn the curve? Do we know what works to turn the curve? Let's look at research evidence base. We should consider low cost and no cost, asking what we can do differently with the resources we have. Are we using them in the best way that we could in making the difference, or are we setting a pattern of behavior because that is the way we've always done it? Be sure to look outside the box or off the wall thinking. If we use all the resources, what would work? One idea may lead to another idea, and that idea may be the inventive idea that would work. You could make sure that we have collected all the information, such as best practices, and do the research. What is our action plan to turn the curve?
The final element to this is the action plan. What are we going to do? We need to define our plan in order of priority. There are 4 criteria for this step, starting with leverage. Will it have the most influence possible, and will it address the priority root cause in the case of the story behind the curve? Next is feasibility. Is it attainable or within our reach? Can we do it? Are there any issues that would be a problem? Values. Is it consistent with defined values? And last is specificity, the specifics of the plan, the who, the what, when, and where. This is sometimes the first step in the action plan. Do we know the plan? Going through this step allows us to define a plan to be implemented. This exercise allows you to list the strategies and rate each criteria as high, medium, and low. Going through the strategies and rating them, those that rate all high in a criteria would be prioritized first action steps. Obviously, as funding allows, you can work down through the list of prioritized strategies. To summarize, we would ask ourselves these 5 questions. How are we doing? What is the story behind the curve? Who are the partners who have a role to play in turning the curve and that thinking process? What works to turn the curve? And then last, what is our action plan to turn the curve? When we look to share this plan out, keep in mind that steps 3 and 4 are for internal planning. So when we share out, we would start with how are we doing with the graph, and then also sharing the forecast that shows where we would head if we're not doing anything at all. What's the story behind the curve, the factors that prioritized, and then what's our action plan, prioritizing the strategies as well. Keep in mind that this process is dynamic. There can be change along the way. We can have change in information that comes in to play into any of the steps along the way. There may be new information that changes how we're doing, new policy or a shift in the community that can change the story behind the curve, maybe new partners that come to the table, or some that need to go that no longer have relevant work to the efforts being made. Also new ideas for what works to turn the curve. Any or all can cause a shift in our action plan, which is okay. It's not specific to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You want to be able to absorb change and be dynamic. If or when change occurs, you simply update the plan. There's no need to start over. Update where necessary, share out the changes, but don't start over. Following this process can make clear and simple for meetings and agendas. The objectives for this meeting can be starting with reviewing the plan and then making any necessary shifts or changes. So the steps to follow to meet these objectives for your meeting would be to start with reviewing the data. How are we doing? Is there any new information on the story behind the curve? Next, are there any new partners that might need to be at the table who have a role in turning the curve? And then thinking about any new information on what would work to turn the curve. And last, making any changes to our strategies, to our action plan for turning the curve. So that's the end in discussing the turn the curve thinking. Next, let's talk about accountability for the whole versus accountability for the part. And the best application of that thinking would be population accountability or the whole versus performance accountability on an individual level. That would be the part. Taking a look at the whole versus the part. A whole is best explained by thinking of the well-being of a population in a geographic area. Being accountable for that is much different than being accountable for the well-being of those that I serve in programs at my agency level. As a whole, we're not in control or cannot be accountable for the entire population, but we are accountable for those we serve under our care. Thus, we have the whole versus the part. This same thinking can be applied within an organization. The organization can act as the whole within accountability for the whole, and the departments or the divisions being accountable for their individual parts that feed into the whole. The most important aspect in applying this thinking is population versus performance accountability. Population being the condition of well-being for a whole population. People are safe, healthy, earning a livable wage, children enter kindergarten ready to learn. There's a definite and distinct difference for performance accountability, which describes how an organization or a government agency or entity is doing their work or their program efforts. It would be unfair to assign the responsibility of a single organization or entity to be responsible for the well-being of the whole population when their efforts are only attributed to a part. Each part is responsible for their individual performance that can contribute to the overall well-being of the whole. In order to do this work, there needs to be some common defined language. Often partners at the table can be using different terms, but are talking about the same thing when talking about performance measures and community efforts. Creating a language discipline around terminology and concepts can help give clear understanding and consistency. Result can mean population result, which is a good condition of well-being for a defined population. And how do we gauge that? By an indicator, a measure which helps quantify the achievement of a result. Both of these are specific to population accountability. For programs, government agencies, community service organizations that provide services or resources for a specific group we talk about. Performance measures, each individual part is to measure and track how well they are doing. So we can see accountability for the whole versus accountability for the part. Indicators at the population level and performance measures for the program or part level. So in applying this turn the curve thinking, we use the indicators and performance measures to define how we are doing. When we say we start with the end, it's the data from these measures that defines our end. To put this all together at the population level, we have a result and an indicator. When we apply turn the curve thinking to the trend line or the forecast of that indicator, which gives us the strategies we develop, these strategies take us to the program or the agency level, which can be state or local government agencies, service organizations, or even a neighborhood and so on, each having its individual performance measures, which they then in turn apply the turn the curve thinking to their own creative strategies. They are creating their own ownership and responsibility for their piece of the puzzle that contributes to the overall well-being and at the population level. We do not use indicators as performance measures for agencies or organizations, etc. Because of this distinction, we are always talking about two different conversations. In respect to the population and performance or the whole and the part, we are asking what are the right things to do to turn the curve on that indicator. That involves multiple partners at the table with joint accountability. No single partner has a sole accountability. At the program level, we know our individual roles and responsibilities as to what our performance measures our performance measures and define the work that we will do as a part. And if we are doing things right, these are the individual programs and the work that they do, and they contribute to the indicators at the population level to help turn the curve. This diagram shows that there's two different levels and two different conversations. The conversation lines between these two levels do not cross. If I'm in the conversation as a program director at the population level, this is not time for me to advocate for my program. I may have a role to play in the bigger picture, but at this level, the conversation is about the whole and what are the right things to do, not what my program does. If I have a role to play individually, then I fit into the conversation at the program level with my program performance. The cumulative effort of each individual organization, program, or agency with their individual performance measure contributes overall to the success at the population level, and the indicators show this by turning the curve. This same principle would apply when running the government. At a local, state, or national level, this thinking could apply. You could ask, what are the performance measures for that government? What collective roles do the individual agencies within that government play? Then we would ask, what are the right things to do to maximize the performance of our government? Collectively, each division or agency is responsible for its performance measures at that level, each performing to maximize the overall performance of the government. This shows performance and performance. These same elements can apply to multiple levels within a welfare system, large organization, or public agency. There would be measures for the whole system, then each agency within the system would have its own performance measure as well. What are the things to do? What are the things that we're doing right? And setting performance measures to contribute to the collective results. This can also apply to an agency having overall performance measures, then each unit within the agency has individual performance measures contribute to the whole. This shows how it can apply at multiple organizations at multiple levels. It's just as important to remember population accountability versus performance accountability.
With that, we'll move to talking about selecting results, indicators, and performance measures. And it's very important to understand that language discipline is very important in this process as well. When you do this process, you need to all agree on what a performance measure is, what a result is, and an indicator. And so we're going to share with you how we define these concepts. A population result is you take a specific population or subpopulation, put it in the parameters of a geographic area, and give it a condition of well-being. That is a population result. It's not specific to a program or an agency. It's the entire population that you choose. So examples of populations or subpopulations are all residents, all children prenatal to 5 years old, all seniors, people with developmental disabilities, African-American males. A geographic area that you could apply to any of those is Australia, a whole country, or a whole state, California, a city, Salt Lake City, the Ogden downtown neighborhood, a school catchment area, or a school district, for example. And then conditions of well-being, you put that at the end once you've defined those parameters. So for example, we have all people in Australia are healthy. All residents of Salt Lake City have affordable housing. All children in Utah enter kindergarten ready to learn. All residents of Ogden downtown are economically secure. All residents of Weber County have a clean environment. So when the tips to doing this is you take those 3 pieces and you make a complete sentence. We want all students to be proficient in reading by the end of 3rd grade in Ogden School District. I guess I got that backwards. I put the geographic area at the end, but you get my point. You want to keep it simple. You want to say what you want. Use simple, plain language. Avoid referencing data or improvement. You want to say the specific thing you want, your North Star, the outcome you are striving to achieve. And avoid referencing services. This is for the entire population that could be getting services in different ways from different things. The services, think of them as a means to that end, that result that you want. Examples of indicators. An indicator is what the data point that you follow for your results to see if you're making a difference for that result that you seek for your population. So for each of these population results, here are some examples of indicators you could use. Percentage of low birth weight babies, or mortality and morbidity rates. For all residents of Salt Lake City having affordable housing, you can use the percentage of households where their housing cost is 1/3 or less of their household income. That would be an excellent indicator if you can get that data regularly. all children in Utah enter kindergarten ready to learn. An indicator would be the percentage of children entering kindergarten assessed ready to learn, according to KEEP, the statewide test. For all residents of Ogden downtown are economically secure, you could use the employment rates or the percentage of youth not in education, employment, or training. All people in Weber County have a clean environment. You could use air quality rates or the percentage of days water is swimmable. Now, your criteria for selecting the indicators are 3 different powers. Remember, less is more. You only want 3 to 5 of these things, these indicators that you're following, headline indicators, 3 to 5 of them, so that you can really understand what's happening and get to work in the work instead of getting stuck in the data all the time. So first of them is communication power. Does the indicator speak to a broad range of audiences? If you were to talk to your neighbor about this, does it make sense to them? Do they connect to what you're saying? Proxy power. Does it say something of central importance about the data? So importance power is another way to talk about it or to say it. What we mean is the indicator, that indicator brings along other data points. If it brings along others, if they react the same way, then you know this is a good headline indicator. Data power. Do you have quality data available on a timely basis for that indicator? So you take all your candidates, put them in one column, and then you mark high, medium, low for each of those powers to find out which ones are your best candidates, the ones that have high on all 3. And if you have some that are high for the 2 others than data power and low for data, then that isn't a good example of something that would be worth your time to develop that data. Put that on your data development agenda. Now moving on to performance measures. Performance measures are specific to specific services or programs or agencies, for example. And they're a combination of these 4 concepts: your quantity, your quality, your effort, and effect. So in the first box, the quantity of your effort is how much service did we deliver. The quality of your effort is how well did you deliver that service. The quantity of your effect is how much change did you produce, and the quality is in the last box. What quality of change did you produce? So a way to summarize these boxes is by asking these 3 questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And is anyone better off? So how much did we do is who are our customers and what services did we give them? How well did we provide those services is how well did we do it? Is anyone better off would be what is the desired impact of those services for those customers or your customer results, if you will. And you'll notice that in those first 2 boxes under quantity, those are going to be raw numbers versus under quality, those are going to be your percents. So an example for an after-school literacy program, let's say, how much did we do would be the number, since it's in the quantity box, number of students attended. The quality of your effort, how well did you do it, is the percent of staff with training and certification for that literacy program. That would be a great way to see how well you did, how well you can do it. And then is anyone better off would be the number of students with at least a half grade level reading gains in a certain amount of time. Or the quality part would be the percent of those students with those same gains. Another example for education would be the number of students. That's how much did we do. How well did we do it? The student to teacher ratio can have something to say about that. Is anyone better off? The number of 9th graders who graduate on time and enter college or employment after graduation. Versus the quality piece would be the percent of that same measurement. An example for a fire department. How much did we do would be the number of responses. How well did we do it would be the response time. Is anyone better off? Would be the number of fires kept to the room of origin in the quantity column, and the quality would be the percent of fires kept to that room of origin. So you'll notice with all of these performance measures, they're not all created equal. This is often why we see lots of quantity, or I should say, how much do we do performance measures, because they're the things that we have the most control over, but are the least important. So you'll see here on the bottom, quality of your effect is what's most important. Is anyone better off? But it is what we have the least control over. And while it is also very important to know that we did our service well, you can never get to is anyone better off and have a good performance there if you didn't give your service very well. But it is the part that's the least control, anyone better off. And so it's intimidating sometimes to try to get those measures and improve them. But instead of avoiding them, you work in partnership with other people in order to have better outcomes in that area. So criteria for selecting headline performance measures, again, less is more. It's the same 3 concepts before. Does it make sense to other audiences? Does it bring along other data points that correlate with that same indicator for that outcome or result, I should say? And do you have quality data available, your data power? You put all those in the column for your candidates. You measure for all powers. The ones that are high in all 3 are good candidates to be your headline indicators, your 3 to 5 ones you're going to follow rigorously. The ones that are low in data power but high everywhere else are good candidates for a data development agenda. So now that you have your indicators and performance measures, this is the thing that you're using in that first question. How are we doing? And then you apply this entire wheel to those indicators on a regular basis in order to turn that curve. And to close, we'll just review the key concepts that we covered. We covered turn the curve thinking, accountability for the whole versus accountability for a part, population accountability versus performance accountability, and selecting results, indicators, and performance measures. And all of these with the understanding that the discipline, language discipline, is key. Any questions?